What's up, everybody? I'll do a very brief video. Hopefully you can hear me. I made the unwise decision of putting on a dishwasher in the background prior to doing this video, not really thinking this all the way through. But, we can proceed. So I made it my business to finish all the way through as I'm looking for the correct name of the video. I was on Netflix and, the reality check inside America's Next Top Model, documentary, which is like a 3-part series, was sort of coming out, or 3 episodes, should I say. So I knew that this was happening. I remember earlier today, a friend of mine was like, hey, she had just went to the gym. She had like a little refreshing smoothie and she was like, I'm going to watch the documentary now. And I was like, oh, I forgot all about it. I didn't know what documentary she was speaking of, but I pretty much assumed that it was going to be this one. So I made it my business, on this lovely President's Day to watch all 3, episodes. I'll say just a few little points that I kind of wrote down about it. One, I do think it was, a very good and entertaining, 3-part series. For me, some of the things that I saw that they did speak on, if you've watched, like, I think other interviews that were done about like Oliver Twixt or, just kind of online in general, you would have seen and would have known that water thing is going to annoy me in the background. But I'll talk louder than that because there's no mic. But you would have seen and you would have known, about some of these incidents that happened, back then. If you followed some of the girls, you would still know. I'm not going to front. Back then, when Top Model kind of first premiered, I was an instant fan. I saw episodes of season 1, but I feel like season 2 back then was when I really watched it from like beginning to the end. Season 1, I don't think I watched it from beginning to the end. It happened to me with a lot of different shows where I don't know where I was episode, or season 1, but season 2 I kind of picked up. So yeah, I was able to watch that, back then. I watched other cycles, you become familiar with certain names, the ones who win, the ones who lose. There was a period of time where I stopped watching Top Model. I couldn't tell you the last. I think in all honesty, one of the last winners that I knew of, or where I stopped, because I think I left the country, or I left the area for a bit, was when the Latin girl won. I think Jailene, which also had the girl Dion, who was also in this one as well. But when the Latin girl Jocelyn was up there, I think that was one of the last ones I stopped watching. I know I've seen other ones after that, but I know I had stopped watching then. Yeah, I couldn't even tell you when I started back. Nonetheless, none of that is important, I guess. So some of the points that I actually wanted to go over. Disclaimer, in some ways, it was such a different time. And I think that that's important to remember when watching these shows. It's not that things were more so correct, and it's not that we can't call them out now, but it was just such a different time. I know that's been said over and over, but I just want people to really, remember some of these things that went down. It doesn't mean that these things were correct, but just, some didn't know better, or it was just, said customs. We know better now. And there are some things that we're doing right now that fast forward some years later, we're going to be like, why was this allowed? Why were we entertaining this? That sort of a thing. Nonetheless, I saw, some people kind of stating, well, I was 12 when this was going on, or I was 7, and I was, I always think back to, like, well, why were you, quote unquote, watching this? I don't know what the ratings were, but to me, this is where, people always, what about the children? What about the kids? It makes me wonder, where were your parents during this time when you were watching this show? And if there were certain things that you didn't understand from the show, were you able to have dialogue with your parents to explain, some of the things that you may have seen or didn't understand, that sort of a thing? If you didn't have that, ability to do so, was there another older adult that you could have gone to? And if not, then I kind of feel like sometimes instead of policing others, police, what's going on in your own backyard and work on, creating that dialogue that you've missed out on, because we can't always expect and or rely on people to, celebs, entertainment, they're not the moral compass, they're not the moral leaders. Sometimes education begins in the home. Just a random little tangent that I kind of just wanted to start with. As they say, in hindsight, things are completely different, and I don't know what people's circumstances were back then. I'm pretty sure that there are many who, I can speak for myself. There are things that, when you're trying to eat, you want to survive. There are things that you would have done, especially with a show with such a large magnitude, such as that, the possibilities are more so endless, or so you think. So there are a lot of things that people are willing to do, and I understand it completely. I don't fault anyone for sometimes doing these things where it's like, it's either you do it and you take the opportunity, or you don't and you miss out on the opportunity to change your life, that sort of a thing. It makes me wonder when looking at this, the one girl, I forget her name, but the one who refused to cut her hair, I think she was trying to look like Mia Farrow. I think it was like a pixie cut or something like that. Sometimes I think about her. She had cut her hair, and I think they wanted to actually remove it even more. It just makes me wonder, just kind of, where is she now? Is she proud, of herself that she kind of advocated for herself? You know what I'm saying? Where, as they say, she didn't sit on the casting couch, but she was just like, no, I'm not going for it. And, it was rude, would then leave my set, but it's, as some say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So, kudos to her for, even though it was just a small haircut, and that small little Mia Farrow haircut definitely could have assisted her with, or so we thought, her taking her career to another level. Kind of glad in some ways that, she did not do that. I wish others had not done that as well. I do think one of the things that we should have gotten from that show, but I get why they didn't do it in some ways, were reunions. Because it would have been good, for I think some of these people to get closure if they would have been able to, and or to state how they felt, whether they regretted, have regrets, did not have regrets, so on and so forth. But I think reunions back then just would have exposed a whole lot, because people would have been able to, once they watched the show, once they saw the editing, now I can come back and speak on how I really feel, regarding how you made me look. This scene didn't come off like that, it just probably would have put Tyra and the rest in a really bad light per se. So I get why in some ways reunions weren't happening. It's also unfortunate too that Takara, was ultimately ahead of her time. When I think about Takara's build now, Takara has a natural build, a bad body, and bad meaning, good, not bad meaning bad. But, Takara's body, was definitely stacked, was definitely banging. Unfortunately, I just kind of feel like, at a time when Takara was around, curves weren't necessarily being, what's the word I'm looking for? They weren't being appreciated. It was, I look back at episodes now of the Parkers reruns, and I look at Kim Parker, Countess Vaughn, and it's like, it's crazy because as per 90 standards, she was seen as being plus size, overweight, quote unquote, the fat one. But you look now and you're like, yo, she's just average. You're like, there's nothing overweight. Like, as a matter of fact, she's kind of small. Now, granted, a lot of people now are getting procedures done, so everybody has like the little ant bodies walking around, but nonetheless, it's just unfortunate, that Takara, just sort of, crawled so that many can walk, and she was just ahead of her time. I wish that more was being done with her now, if it was her doing. But yeah. Let's see. The fact that there were many children and maybe some like teens that were watching this, and, especially with the whole goal of being thin, models and thin waist, thin build, so on and so forth. I go back into, and I understand that they have the TV ratings, but maybe parents need to, in some ways, censor and filter what their children are watching, and or once again, doing more educating with these children to let them know, so, this happens in some parts of the world. This does not happen in some parts of the world. Education, regarding, confidence building, things that they're going to come across. I think it's key. There are too many times where I do think that we as a society, or parents or adults, it takes a village, whoever, we try to censor children from too much. And I think that that can be like, a bad thing in some ways. I do think education is more so key, preparing them. No, I'm not saying, a 3-year-old, you're going to teach her about, tampons or something like that. Not at 3. But, as they get a little older, have the conversations, explain what the menstrual cycle is and, all that stuff. Going way off topic. Let's see. I look back at some of the girls who did advocate. Once again, I forget the woman's name, but the Mia Farrow haircut. I also, watching this, when they, Jade was vocal, where Jade was like, but you chose my worst shot. Kudos to Jade, for actually, I love Jade. People can say what they wanted to about Jade. I thought Jade was the life of the party. I even remember, and I still laugh at it, the scene where she was doing the cover girl and she's walking through the party and she's like, hey, fabulous, and I think Mr. J was like, she's such a drag queen. But I really like Jade. I like people, call it delusions of grandeur, whatever you want to call it, an inflated level of self-esteem or ego. I love that tribe. But nonetheless, her speaking up like that, I thought was a great thing. I think what makes it a little bit more difficult, and I think in some ways where I'm going to give Tyra a little bit of a slap on the wrist, is when one person speaks up and then you ask a question like, does everybody else feel like it was their worst, picture or whatever like that? When you get a bunch of hands that sort of go up, like, yes, I felt like this was my worst picture. At that point, to me, sometimes it's like, so you're making it like, majority rules, so granted, everyone feels like this. You're not the only one, but I just kind of feel like when you're, speaking up, for said people and you don't have these people behind you, to me, it just becomes a little bit more difficult. It's almost like, okay, well, later for what you are saying, because, everyone feels the complete opposite. It's like when they be like, everyone doesn't like you, but it's like everybody feels the complete opposite. I think that that's sometimes the unfortunate part. And I think that those girls back then, because they wanted the opportunity so bad, they wouldn't have advocated, for others, or, it definitely was, don't get on this lady's bad side. If I say something or do something that she does not like, there's a good chance that I'm going to be home and I'm going to miss out on this opportunity. And I think that's the unfortunate part. Now, I think with a lot of these like competition shows and just reality shows, air quotes, it's about, to me, I remember even back then stating with American Idol, if I can't sing, but I wouldn't want to win. I feel like winning, there's a lot that comes with that, just in terms of like contractually, you can't do this, you can't do that, there's so many projects, so on and so forth. Don't get me wrong, with being on the show, I'm pretty sure that there's a little bit that comes with that, but probably not as much. I always say I would want to go on one of those shows and I would probably just want to lose. I don't want to be, the winner. Granted, I would love the winning money, but I just feel like sometimes the exposure is what you more so want. And you can kind of take that exposure and do a whole lot with it. There are many shows that we look at and we'll see, sometimes, you may see the winner, but then you'll see, like, I don't want to call them the loser, but the ones who didn't win go on to do way better, So I kind of feel like that's one huge difference with these shows now as opposed to back then. Back then, I think it was a point you wanted to win because you wanted the contract. And although many girls went on to do, great, and some of the men too, great and wonderful things, the goal was to win. And I think now it's not about winning. So I know she, I guess, talked about doing cycle 25. If anyone is doing that cycle, don't try to go and win. Just get the exposure and keep it smoking. I'm not going to front. It hurt hearing about it being personality over like the modeling part, and that's where I guess making good TV comes into play. That part sort of hurt. I think Bree had actually said, that part or whatever, but I'm not going to front. That part hurt just a smidge because it's like, once again, you want to feel like you are watching a real show with real emotions, real actions, real decisions, fairness, but you see that it is the entertaining factor. Because at the end of the day, they are producing a TV show. So to me, that's where the fakeness comes in, the scripts come in, where it's no longer real. And I just have to realize that we're no longer in those stages of having, quote unquote, real TV, real reality TV, if there ever really was real reality TV. And I think there was. Just kick the damn camera, tacky. As it's just shaking now. Yeah, gosh. Let's see. I think another piece, and I'm going to be very brief because once I finish, I just need to go eat. It's getting a little late as I'm doing this. It is, what I did like was that Kenya, I do remember all of the, fat shaming that Kenya got. And I look back once again at when you look at this girl, a good week, or longer than a week, but, 2 weeks in a gym and a good diet, I'm saying that body could have gotten, back with no problem. Not saying anything was wrong with her body, but the little bit of non-flatness that they saw in her stomach, I feel like could have been, fixed immediately in a healthier way as well. I do think with that show, I wish that one of the things that they could have done is to have, I don't remember around that time if like The Biggest Loser was out and that they went over, that was like, an excessive way of losing weight. But it would have been great if they would have had like trainers and nutritionists on as well, because you're trying to like show how many can, survive and thrive within this industry. Why not teach lessons as well? Hopefully going forward, I doubt she'll see this video, but they look into doing something such as this, providing the education, okay, well, and Tyra did give a tip, that tip has kind of stayed with me, myself, over the years. Like, you can eat a burger, just remove the bread. And, depending on which personal trainer, dietitian, nutritionist, whoever you speak to, some would say, no, keep said carbs. You need carbs. And some would say, oh, no, remove them. That's what I think it's one of those things where it just helps to get professional opinion from somebody. Maybe they can go based on your blood type, body type, your goals, so on and so forth. Let's see. The ratings that they were talking about going down. To me, that was a little unfortunate about the ratings kind of going, not unfortunate. I don't want to say it was unfortunate. That's the wrong word. I kind of felt like it wasn't a surprise with the ratings going down. I think it's one of those things where we didn't see enough of what the winners were doing. And maybe it's because we're not all within said model industries. So I remember one time back then, I remember after the show, seeing Jade, walking the runway on like BET's, it wasn't Spring Bling, but it was some kind of BET thing that they had. And I remember they had like women in bathing suits. I don't know what kind of a fashion show it was, but they had something going on. But I remember seeing her somewhere in the background. Probably were others too, but I specifically remember seeing her. Like, oh, we can still see what she's doing now. I think with many people, it's like we don't see, what said opportunities are. I've heard the same thing happens with those from The Voice. I hear that, like, you'll see them, you'll watch the show, they'll win, but you never hear anything that happens afterwards. American Idol, I haven't watched American Idol in years, but, I feel like with those other winners, I'm not sure what's happening with them either. But I think that plays a part as to why, the ratings have gone down and people no longer watch, that sort of a thing. What I will give credit to with RuPaul's Drag Race, on the other hand, and not, I like RuPaul, but my fear is, something like this might come out about his show too, because some people have like not so good things to say about RuPaul. I like the show, I think RuPaul is dope. I don't think RuPaul gets enough flowers or credit from the Black community as he should, but that's a whole nother topic. I think one of the things that keeps people going back to that show and auditioning, and where I think they're on like cycle, 16, 18, they're on something, and I'm pretty sure they're probably going to make it to 20, is because you get to see like those drag queens, kings, or artists, or the people they are, you're getting to see them more so do other opportunities. They see the bigger picture. You see the rewards of going on the show. That exposure helps them tremendously. Not saying everybody has made it to like some top, stellar level, but you definitely can see them in other ways, whether it be Broadway, whether it be other reality shows, comedy specials, they're touring. You get to see the fruits of their labor from going on the show. So I think with Top Model, in all these other shows, if we got to see that, maybe your ratings wouldn't go down as much, or they wouldn't have gone down. I feel like with them, although the controversial like photo shoots and things like that, I get what you were trying to do. Also, just going to it was a different time. It doesn't make it right, but it was a different time. And yeah, those were just like a couple of points that I kind of took from it. With Kenya, I was happy to see when she stopped, the male dancer. It was messed up because she's going through that. I think with Mr. J and all the other and the camera crew feeling like, oh, you're wasting time, and we're all surrounding you. Once again, it is, you may not be privy to what's happening. Your one job is probably looking to make sure I'm getting this shot, but you're not me. You're not experiencing, your eyes are not completely on me. Your eyes are set to your job. The photographer, you're shooting, the creative director, you're creatively directing, that sort of a thing. So although there were many men around, it doesn't mean that you are really in tune with what's going on. So I definitely give her credit for speaking up for herself and stopping it. Unfortunately, I think sometimes people don't realize or know how to take no meaning no, as well. I think maybe some feel like, the aggressive hunt is what's going to finally get them to prey. Not like learn how to read the room, yeah, that's a whole other topic within itself as well, because, some should be able to be honest or say, I'm not interested, and it not be that. But unfortunately, a lot of times that's not the case. She says, I don't want to talk to you. He wants to slap her, pop her. She becomes an ugly, bald head bitch. I never wanted you, so on and so forth. She has to give out a fake number, these sort of things, which is unfortunate. And once again, a whole conversation within it. So those were just some of the few little notes that I kind of took while watching it. There's more that I could say, but I would end it there. I would tell anybody, if you have not watched it, do yourself a favor, go ahead and watch it. I do think it was great. I do give Tyra credit for sitting down and speaking on it. I do wish more people, and once again, hindsight, but I do think more people just use your voices. We're now, especially now, no, I don't want to do it. I don't have to do it, that sort of a thing. Going forward, I think with that show, they will make it their business to, I'm sure of, I would assume, to make sure that they're not dealing with, these post-traumatic show, type feelings and episodes and things kind of later on. Yeah, I will say too, they all looked good. I thought I would see more people. I thought I would see more people. It was refreshing seeing Ebony. I feel like many hadn't seen Ebony in a very long time. Small tidbit or small little jewel. I actually ran into her. She'll never see this video, but we ran into each other at this point. It probably was about a year or two ago in Manhattan. I can describe the setting that we were at, but I remember, nonetheless, she was talking to a colleague of mine, and she had said they were talking about something. And when she mentioned, like, yeah, I was on like Top Model, I was sitting in the back and I got up immediately. And I'm like, yeah, I remember you, and da-da-da. And we went, I was like, yeah, the Vaseline, and went and, talked about the whole thing or whatever. So it was definitely refreshing seeing her in said documentary. Years ago, too, I remember getting a haircut, and I think I was at a salon. I don't know if it was like on Houston or something. It was a famous hairstylist, Diane DaCosta or something like that. She wrote a book, And I remember going there to get my hair. She was gonna cut it and put in like these 2-strand twists. And as I was outside, I was on the phones a long time ago. I remember Miss J, it was Miss J and it was a couple of other people, but I recognized Miss J. And there was another guy, I think his name was like Babatu or something like that. I think he had locks. I only knew him because I had heard his name from a like show with Kimura, you know, so that's how I knew his name. But I remember they were kind of walking down the street, you know, as well. You know, I just kind of like locked eyes with Miss J for a second. I think I was on the phone and just, I ended up like not rolling my eyes, but just me being on the phone, I just had like this nasty look. And Miss J looked like, you know, they were like kind of feeling the afro, you know, and maybe just feeling, you know, every day, you know, but they were definitely feeling I feel the afro. And I was just like, afterwards, like, damn it, like, you don't realize you just looked real rude at somebody, you know, so I'm like, note to self, kind of work on that. You know, but once again, you know, it was a different time, you know, so I'm learning my lesson. Yeah, those are like 2 of my little top model, sort of less than 6 degrees of separation from people. Yeah, I thought they all looked good. I was, like I said, a huge fan of many, some that stick out name wise. When the show came on, I remember seeing one of the girls like, oh, that was Janasha. I remember that. I think Sarah was like the Middle Eastern girl. I think they showed a picture of like her family. Yeah, I can't remember, you know, April, season 2, I was really kind of like invested in. And many of the other ones, Dion, I thought Dion looked great. Dion looked different. And I'm not saying different in like she didn't look good before, but I'm like, oh, you know, she looks, you know what I'm saying, great, you know, now. She looked good then and she still looks good now. I just wouldn't have thought it was the same person. Maybe it's like the eyebrows, the hair. Yeah, I'm trying to think who else. Yeah, there were certain ones I would just love to know what they're doing now. Yeah, I can keep going on and on. But nonetheless, once again, if you have not watched it, go ahead and watch it. Don't beat up Tyra too much. You know, we're learning as we grow. And I want to just pinpoint the name of it once again. Reality Check Inside America's Next Top Model. That's my very quick blurb. If you like it, you know, feel free to comment. If you disagree with something that I say, if you agree with something that I say, if you're not sure of something that I'm saying, feel free to leave a comment wherever you watch this at, wherever you see this at. Please go ahead and support as much as you can as we are trying something new, as I'm putting my thumbs up in the camera. You all take care. Have a good one.